It was, yeah, it was on.
That looks nice. Yeah.
Nice. Keep them like that's okay. I don't trust you.
Oh, that's flickering.
Yeah.
I get very excited.
Come on. We'll see.
Oh, there we go.
Maybe we all just.
I don't know what it's doing. I'll try over. Maybe I'll try a different plug here.
Yeah.
That ever been a problem for you?
Ever. Was it doing it with Roden's computer?
I don't think so. Let me see if a different plug on my computer makes sense. Maybe it's better.
The wonders of modern technology. Can everybody hear me okay? More volume or less volume?
Put the music back on.
A little moment of Zen. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. This is our 12th or 13th annual State of the Village meeting. We like to do this once a year to kind of go over some of the high level, high glossy overview type of things that the village is involved in, kind of do a year in review and then a preview of things to come this year. I want to start with some introductions. I'll have board members introduce themselves, but I wanted to acknowledge our EMS chief, EMS administrator, Joel Fay, who helped us set up this morning. Thank you, Joel. I thought I saw Chief Taylor's truck in the parking lot. He's in his office. Chief Matt Taylor, our fire chief, is hiding in his office. He may poke his head in at some point. We have Jess Squared, Jessica Giles, and Jess Weber, our clerk treasurer and deputy clerk treasurer, who manage all things in the front office. And we are joined by folks online via Zoom. If you are interested in asking a question either during any of the parts of the presentation or during our Q&A, just use the raise hand feature because we've turned off the ability to unmute yourselves. And so with that, I will start with myself. I am Rorden Hart, the mayor here in the village of Trumansburg, and we'll start down on the end with Ben.
Hello, I'm Ben Darfler, trustee for the village of Trumansburg. I work most closely with the DPW group, and so I did also want to recognize that Dusty Vanderzee and Clinton Denman, our supervisor and an assistant supervisor for the DPW, are back here as well.
I am Joanna Haynes, and I've been with the village so far for less than a year, and I work closely with Chief Nelson and the police.
It's
okay.
I got a clap for Ben Carver, deputy mayor. I work. I work
There's always one, Marlene.
primarily with EMS and youth commission.
And Marcia Horn, and I am the representative and the commissioner for the fire department.
Our format is fairly informal today. We do have a slideshow presentation more for our own benefit in terms of keeping track of what we want to cover than for you all to be able to see anything. There is one slide which I hope you can see. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Not planning to belabor any of the points that you'll see on screen. I liked how we ran things last year with a lengthy Q&A portion. I like the kind of, although I don't think we're going to wander through the crowd, I like the town hall style meeting that we can have so you can ask really any question village related. I do ask that you keep it village related. But before we get started, I just wanted to say that I have had the good fortune in my time, not only on the board, but in my time as mayor, to work with some really outstanding individuals on this board. I have had a front row seat to other municipalities and other levels of government and how they operate, and they don't always operate very effectively. And often there are some organizations allow their personality differences and differences of opinion to affect their ability to do the job that they were elected to do. And that has never been an issue on this board. We have fantastic trustees. We have individuals who are committed to putting in the number, whatever the number of hours might be, to accomplish the work that needs to be done for the village and for its residents. And so I personally thank everyone on this board and frankly, everyone who works for the village for their commitment to the village. And with that, speaking of technology,
I wanted to make sure that people online saw it, so I think we've got it sharing there and then also here. Might have to suffer through a little bit at the top. Such as technology.
okay,
All right.
who's up first?
I'm up first.
Perfect.
So yeah, I wanted to take a few minutes this morning to talk first about the DPW, if that will get out of the way. I figured, I wanted to look back at the year of the DPW and just kind of celebrate some of the major projects that have happened this year. When I think about kind of the arc of the DPW as I've been in this role working with them, the past year or two feels like it's really been a story of efficiency and productivity in the department. And see if I can. This is going to be annoying, but we'll work through it. This list of projects in front of you, and I'll talk through them a little bit more in depth, is really a tremendous amount of work. And to think about it from the DPW, we've had as many as 5 folks on the crew. We're working with just 4 folks right now. And it seems like we're doing significantly more than we were, even with 5 folks on the crew. There's been a lot of focus on how do we move more quickly, how are we more efficient, and as a result, we've been able to do more with less and get through more projects. And I'm really appreciative of that for the guys in the crew who work so hard at it. To start at the top, Greg Street. So folks are probably familiar with the pedestrian bridge by Greg Street behind the post office. Over the past while, 5 or so years, the bridge has been in and out of commission. And it turns out it's not exactly the bridge that's the problem. It's the side of the stream bank that is eroding, and therefore the bridge support was starting to lack, and there was concerns of how stable the bridge itself was. The bridge itself is in good shape, but if it's obviously not on stable ground, that doesn't help. So in the past year or two, or past couple of years, the bridge has now been reopened by extending the bridge further up the bank. That puts it on stable ground. And then this past year, the DPW has improved a lot of the runoff and drainage problems around the bridge that have been causing the erosion. And so now that's in a much better state. There's still more work to do. We're looking for grant funding around what we can bring in some grant funding to actually restore and stabilize the existing bank. But now we've reduced the problem going forward. We have more time to kind of work through those issues. So that was one of the larger projects this past year. Some of the always ongoing large projects that the DPW takes on are paving and sidewalks. So this past year, South Street was paved, as well as Meadow Drive and Parkside Drive. And if folks were familiar with South Street, that was getting a little rough for a little while there. But we knew there was a lot of vehicle traffic going on for the new development at 46 South Street there. And so we waited until a large part of that, the first phase of that, was completed to pave the road, so we weren't just kind of running large trucks over it right after we paved it. So that's in much better shape now, as well as some of these other smaller roads. And we could, every year, the DPW is picking up a couple of roads, making sure we're always in good shape. And in this year, I believe, and Dusty can correct me if I'm wrong, I think South Street was the first time we've gone through and graded down and then repaved. So a lot of, in the past, we've often just laid another layer on top. The roads are getting to the point where that's a lot of extra layers and layers and layers, and we're seeing people struggle to get in their driveways. It starts impacting it in different ways. And so we're starting to experiment with finding some of these roads and grading them back down and paving over them, but we're able to do that in a cost-effective manner. Sidewalks as well. Elm Street, folks have walked by Elm Street in front of the town offices. That's a new stretch of sidewalk. I certainly appreciate. I walk down to Main Street that way quite a bit. But the new thing that the DPW has added on now is finding these heaved sections on Main Street. So the Main Street project, the sidewalks there, this is now going back 20 years or so. They're heaved, snow and ice moves them around and they're uneven, they cause a trip hazard. So we're starting to actually come back around and improve and repair existing sidewalk rather than kind of ripping out huge stretches and replacing. So we're starting to have a new motion there with sidewalks. Construction is another huge new one for the DPW, and this is largely thanks to Clinton for joining the group, bringing his construction experience to the department. And as a result, we've been able to start addressing larger projects within the village, within the DPW, instead of having to contract those out and figure that all out. It's a huge savings for the village. And this past year, we've looked at an overhang roof. They've created an overhang roof for the DPW garage to protect some of the equipment, give more storage space and organizational space. Improved the well roof at Frontenac, which was leaking and kind of a mess. It's been quite old down there. And then the DPW office roof also was needed in repair, and they've been able to manage those repairs in-house, which has been wonderful. Finally, I would say water, and I think this is probably the place where I'm most excited. So it's not always that everyone gets excited about water. This is why I'm in the role, I guess. The folks, the guys have repaired 5 water main breaks so far this season. Maybe 6. Yeah, this was not updated since yesterday. So now 6. Yep. 9. There we go. Do I hear 10? Any 11, 12? No. So there's been quite a few. It's not, I don't think that's an abnormal amount. It fluctuates year to year, depends heavily on the weather and how intense the freezing thaw cycle is that year. And in general, a lot of those are actually about, and this is something I always have to remind myself, it's not typically about the state of the pipe itself. It's about the state of the gravel and everything around it. So when they were putting in pipes 30, 40, 50 years ago, they would just dig out what was over there, put it in the pipe, throw whatever was back in. And sometimes you have large rocks the size of your head or bigger that are pushing against the actual pipe. And over time with thaw and freeze, that just gets shoved right into the pipe. And there's kind of nothing the pipe can do about it. When we do new pipes now, you fill it back in with smaller gravel and you do a much better job of it to alleviate this. But there's, significant amount of the system that is put in, prior times with worse practices. So that's something we're working through. So there's a lot that they do there, but the water valves is the thing that I'm actually interested in. So this is something we've been talking about for quite some time with the DPW. And this past year, we're able to actually get in and replace 11 water valves. And the value there is that when you've got a water break, you have to go shut off the water to get in there to fix the pipe. If you've got a valve on either side of that, very easy, turn them off, fix your pipe. Only a couple of people are impacted because they're right there. Turn it back on, away you go. If the valves are broken, and there's many in the system that are in disrepair, need a repair, you try and turn that pipe or that valve, maybe it doesn't turn, maybe it turns halfway, but that's not enough. You have to go to all the other pipes around it and shut off all those valves to try and actually shut the water flow off to that spot before you can work. And now that's extra time running around. That's more people impacted with water main breaks. So there's a huge value in replacing these and repairing them, not just for making life easier for the DPW, but obviously making life easier for residents, especially during water main breaks. So there's 11 of these done this year. That's in my count, I think it's about a day per valve. So that's, 2 full weeks of extra work that the DPW's been able to free up from all the other efficiencies that they've found to be able to start working on this and make really good progress. So it's been really fantastic to see. That's an ongoing process. We're going to continue to go around and replace valves. So you'll see that now more often during the summer, where it's not water main breaks that might be shutting off water here and there, but it is water valve replacement. Thankfully, we know when we're going to do those. We can get ahead of them. We can let people know. You can be a bit more prepared than when there's a water main break, but do keep an eye out for that sort of information as we're getting through it. So just a huge amount of work that the DPW has been doing over the past year, and really adding on top of their normal just week-to-week routine of picking up leaf litter and lawn litter, mowing lawns, plowing snow, all of these things that are just constantly happening anyhow. These are all the major projects that they're doing on top of all those day-to-day things, week-to-week things. And I'm just very impressed and thankful for all the work that they do. And then I will continue briefly to talk about water and sewer. So, we touched on that. The DPW is in charge of all the infrastructure there. But there's a couple key initiatives, if I kind of put my hat on thinking about everyone here or most of everyone here as utility users of the village's water and sewer system. And I wanted to call out a couple issues, or not issues, couple ideas and initiatives that we have going forward. So people are just aware as these things start rolling out. So first of all, I did want to say we produced 62.8 million gallons of water in 2024. I think that's a lot. I don't have any sort of frame of reference, but that seems like a lot. It's an impressive amount of water that we've all used and processed through our system. The key initiatives I want to point out are a couple fold. To start, cellular read water meters. So everyone's water, where water comes into your house, there's a meter there. We track the meter. That's how we understand how much water people have used, how we bill. Currently, the meters have a radio read on them, which means that they have just enough power to kind of project the number of gallons you've used out to the road. And the DPW can drive around. They've got a receiver. They can see how much, they can read that number and see what your bill should be, what your usage was for the past cycle. Works well enough. That was the technology at the time. Those meter heads are getting to the end of their serviceable life. So we've been discussing, do we stick with that technology? Do we go somewhere else? What are we doing? We're landing on trying out cellular read heads. So the benefit there is those use the cell network, and you don't have to run around with a truck and record everyone's read once a month, every 2 months. So it saves some more time on the DPW, gives them more time to work on more meaningful projects. But it also means that we can get those reads kind of continuously, right? I said real time here a couple times a day, but that's significantly better than every other month. And the value there is we can see and help people understand more of their usage. So right now, if you have a high water bill and you come in, somewhere in the past 2 months, you used a lot of water. It's very hard to know what was going on, what actually happened there. With this, we'll be able to say, it was actually, Tuesday last week was when you're using a lot of water. Was there something special happening? Who knows? And we'd like to eventually get to the point of actually realizing that and kind of telling you, hey, looks like your water's been pretty high the past 24, 48 hours. Maybe you want to check something. Maybe you're traveling. I've been guilty of having a running toilet while I was traveling for a week. This is a high water bill that time around. People leaving for the winter, we can be a little more proactive on that. So there's a lot of, when you see the billing side of water, there's a lot of difficulty when there's these high reads. What happened? Who knows? It's hard to really sort out the real reality. This will help us a lot with those issues and helping out customers better understand their water use. The reason I also bring it up, though, is because that is in your house. The DPW will have to get into your house to replace that meter head. Not a particularly long process, but it will require checking with everyone at some point, getting in your basement, just switching some out. So just keep that in mind. Over the next couple of years, we'll be trying to roll throughout the whole village. So keep that in mind. Service line identification. This is a project that's come from the EPA and the state as well to make sure we understand. Let me back up. Service lines. That's what goes from the water main to your house. That is actually owned by you. It's not owned by the village. The village owns the water main and you own the line to your house. However, because we are a municipality and the state can kind of dictate down to us, they're requiring that we know what the makeup is of everyone's service line. They want to make sure there's no lead, there's no galvanized pipe. They want to understand that the quality of the water that's getting not just through our water mains, but all the way into your house is top notch. We did an inventory last year, wrapped that up in the fall. We know most lines we can verify that they do not have lead in them. There's about 200 lines that we don't know what they're made out of. We don't expect that there's any lead in there, but we don't know for sure. So the next step is to start going through one by one and actually hydrovacing. You kind of come in and blow some water down there, mix up the dirt, pull it out, look at the pipe, put it all back, move on. And so we're going to start a process again over a multi-year phase of checking everyone's service lines and understanding exactly what they're made out of so that you can rest easy and know it definitely isn't lead, it's X, Y, and Z, whatever it might be. And we'll be keeping track of that. Some folks may have gotten letters in the fall last year that said, we don't know what your service line is made out of. If you got one of those, there was a whole bunch of information where you can go to try and learn more for yourself, test your own water if you're worried in that way. And I expect most of this will end up as we'll have to send those letters every year and you'll just stop seeing one at some point. I will have identified your line, likely not lead. If there is obviously any problem, we'll be sure to tell everybody. And you can always get in touch with Dusty, and maybe Dusty wants to say a bit more there.
But the other 600, no, for a fact, there's no lead in those. There is copper or it's new enough to be CPS, which is plastic. We have zero record of any lead.
Yeah. I'll just repeat that real quick to say for folks that couldn't hear online that there's about 850 service lines in the village. 650 of them, we know there is no lead. And so it's just these last 200 that we're trying to get through. There's a question if there's a published list of the 200. There is the whole inventory is public. I don't remember if we've posted that directly on the website. I can look into that. Say it again? We didn't. Yeah, the individuals have been reached out to, and that is a public record, and the state certainly has it. And if you wanted to ask the clerk or myself, I'm sure we could give you the full list. Yes. So the village will do the physical looking at the pipes over the next some number of years. We haven't figured out a full, life cycle for this. So they'll be doing the physical inspection, and that is the gold standard. If people got a letter that said, we don't know what your pipe's made out of, and they're concerned, there's a lot of information in there about how you could test your own water. Not unless you're particularly concerned and want to test your water. The reason the water testing is, we'll tell you if there's lead in it, obviously. And so that's a really good, test to run if you're concerned. It's not the gold standard because you can have lead pipes and the lead might not be leaching into your water. So we want to actually look at the actual pipe and understand exactly what's going on there. So that's why the DPW will be looking at the physical pipe itself. And then very briefly at the end to talk more about the water rates and billing. We are looking at updating the billing, right? So everyone gets the little card, unless you're doing online electronic, which is lovely, but you get the little postcard. There's a lot of information on there. And honestly, it's not enough information. It's kind of compact and confusing. So it turns out that, sending a full sheet to everybody, full letter size paper is not significantly more expensive than the postcards that we're currently sending, but it gives us a lot more space to break out your bill, really walk you through what are the different components of the bill, what has changed, whatever we want to put on there, give you more information. So that is something we're working through. It's not going to be in this most immediate billing cycle, but we're hoping for it'll be in the May billing cycle. So look for that. If you have any questions and concerns, please do bring that back into the front office. I'm sure we could probably still adjust things as we go if we're seeing that things remain confusing, because we really do want it to be a fairly self-understandable piece of paper so you understand your bill and exactly what's happening there. Excellent. An example of that will be posted on Monday of what that will look like so people can start familiarizing themselves with that. And then finally, to talk about rates, we have seen, I'm sure everyone's noticed, water and sewer rates moving up over the past 1 to 2 years. That was in response to a bunch of infrastructure projects by bringing on a second well at Taganic Park and by upgrading the sewer plant that have been in the works for a decade or more now. And those are completed. Those have been, at this point, they're kind of old news that they've just been working fine. But we knew that was going to increase the rates. The water and sewer utilities have to generate enough revenue from the rates to cover all their costs. None of the costs or revenue comes from tax dollars. It's all from the rates themselves. And we knew that that was going to bump up the rates. We tried to hold that off as long as possible, particularly through COVID. And so we held off arguably longer than was responsible. And so that's where we've seen these rates starting to phase in, even though it feels a little bit later than all that construction that happened a decade plus ago. But at this point, we're fully rolled out. We don't expect any more changes this year. This is going to be a year of seeing what those actual rates come in. So much of this is projections and guessing and hoping. And so we're going to give a good year of what exactly are those rates, understand the budget. We're working through budget season right now. We're actually talking about water and sewer budget next Wednesday, if you're all interested. And we'll keep adjusting and looking at that, but we don't anticipate any changes this year, and we'll see where future years go. But the utilities are looking in a good spot just from early numbers. So hopefully we can keep those rates steady for as long as we can manage. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Ben. I would ask, actually, if we can, try to hold off on questions until the end, just so that we can get through all this material. I don't want to turn this into Saturday morning nap by PowerPoint. So we want to cover that information. I just want to add one thing. Ironically, it was actually our very first State of the Village. I had to go back and look and see when this was, but our very first State of the Village was 2013. And it was specifically to discuss very large upgrades to our water and sewer systems, and that those rates would double by the end of the project. Well, the project concluded in the fall of 2018. We had intended to fully phase in rate increases by 2020. Something happened in 2020 that led us to decide to hold off on those rate increases. And so now we're fully phased in. So as Ben said, it feels late and disconnected from the infrastructure projects, but it is because of those projects that we began 12 years ago. And with that, I believe police is next.
I have a few slides. So for police, when we look back at 2024, I started in this position in April. So the numbers that I have gotten are from the chief of police. And so far for this year, or for 2024, we had 2 full-time officers working, 8 part-time officers, and we've had 1 vacant position. During that time, our officers have worked 6,620 hours, and those hours peaked in July. And prior to my time, there was actually a proposal for a grant that we did receive in 2024. And some of the items that we spent money on for this year are security cameras. We've greatly upgraded our security cameras for some of our village buildings. And then a Floxus safety system, which connects to the state of New York. We've also made sure that all of our police vehicles have radar. And we have upgraded our lighting for our buildings to LED lighting. So these are some of our activities that our police have participated in different capacities. Things like the annual bike ride. They take children from the farmers market grounds all the way to school. Kids ride their bikes and walk to school from there, and everybody is actually can participate on that day. That is May, so our police will escort them all the way to school and make sure that the sidewalks are clear for them. And then other things like the Memorial Day parade, where our chief is actually heading that parade, as well as grassroots. That is usually like a big part of why there are peak hours in July. They help make sure that there is safe parking for everyone. Those homes that do not get blocked by the vehicles. Our chief of police actually goes and physically puts those signs on those houses, as well as maintaining safety within our village. And then also clearing traffic for things like Winterfest, where they redirect traffic, or even our May Day 5K race. And this year, the gorgeous marathon that runs through Ithaca actually came through Trumansburg for a short span, and then went back, or started actually in Trumansburg and then went down to Ithaca, which was very different for this year compared to previous years. They do start in May, really, trying to make sure that they are seen by the community, just like everybody else in wintertime. And they really end in December with Winterfest. So as far as police call stats, from January through December of 2024, most of our calls were non-criminal investigative calls, and most of those are property checks. The large graph shows in orange is the non-criminal investigation, and then on the right-hand side just shows how many property checks were included in that. So the graph definitely moves with those property checks. So the total number of calls for the year was 2,322. 90% were non-criminal, and the majority were property checks. We do, during our monthly meetings, I do highlight what the major what the major calls were throughout the month. So I do have those available. And the only thing that we stress is when something is taking place, please call 911. Do not wait to see the chief or to see a police officer to bring something up that may or may not have been important. It's important for the police to be able to investigate those calls as soon as you see something. For instance, even something as minor as someone blocking a driveway, you can't really do anything about it after the fact. So please call 911 if it's called for. Thank you.
Chief Nelson is not here this morning, but I wanted to thank him in his absence. I wanted to thank him for his service to the village. This August will be 7 years that he's been our police chief. Time flies. I think he's done a fantastic job doing a lot of things to modernize the department. The move to full-time police officers over an entire roster of part-timers has, believe it or not, saved the village money and improved efficiency, not only from the kind of the police department standpoint, but also it gives residents the opportunity to get to know our officers if it's the same person that you're seeing a lot of the time. I had asked Chief for, in 2018, Chief had told me he could give me 5 years. I asked him for 10. We're at 7, so I'm hoping I can win that debate and keep him around for a few more years. Marcia, fire.
Next. Go next.
I think my microphone works. So as you can see, we have total calls of 383 this year. The village had 139. The town of Ulysses had 166. We do serve Covert at 39, Hector at 15, and Mutual Aid at 24. As you notice on the bottom, our total training hours are 1,607. And I can't emphasize enough that these are volunteers. These are not paid individuals. This is 1,607 hours that they put in extra aside from their family time, from their jobs. And as you can imagine, it's getting harder and harder. A lot of our volunteers now are starting to age out. I would say the average age of our volunteers is, I don't know, what would you say, 40 something, mid 40s, and the rest of them are older. We have some really wonderful young people coming in, but not enough. So if you know any wonderful young people that would love a career in firefighting, would just like to get their toes wet, that would be great for them to come and volunteer and just to see what it's all about. We have 43 right now volunteer members in the fire department. 21 interior that are qualified, 21 exterior. We have 12 EMTs that are within the volunteer, and 3 paramedics. And as you can imagine, EMS and fire usually go hand in hand with one another on several calls usually. Specifically this year, we have had some very difficult calls. We had the huge fire in Ovid. We had another huge residential house burn, and a very unfortunate and sad body recovery at the Gorge. So I want everyone to realize that there are very difficult, sad things that people see and people do involving this career, and it's a big sacrifice, and they do it for the love of what they do and the love of the people in their community. So we do have a new fire truck coming this year. What's the expected delivery? Oh, is it 26? Oh, I thought it was 25. Okay. Next year. And as you can imagine, fire trucks are not cheap. I think this one came in at 8 something, close to $900,000. And that does not even include what goes on the truck. Here's your truck. Now you need to buy the engine. No. So yeah, those are things that we put in the budget and that we save for along the line. We have a replacement schedule that the mayor goes over with every department so that we can save money and put money aside for these really super expensive things that are going to happen. And lots of times we are mandated to replace our equipment, maybe even before they get to their life use. So it's unfortunate, but sometimes we have to replace equipment that they require that we replace, even though it may not, it's something that you or I would typically keep going on and using. So, but I don't think I have anything more to say other than we have great volunteers. We have a wonderful, dedicated company, and thank you to everybody, all the taxpayers and the residents, for realizing what an important and valued service it is for our village and our community, because we serve quite a ways out too.
I wanted to just add one thing to what Marcia said. I sometimes feel odd in this position because I feel like mayors are supposed to be rah rah and flag waving, and I always end up feeling like the wet blanket. But when I first came on the board a long time ago now, I believe the fire company had 92 members, 92 active members. So we have maintained the trend, which is occurring nationally, of decline in total available volunteers. The one thing, the bright side is that, and this is going to sound terribly ageist, and I don't mean it to be that way, our average age of our volunteers, particularly in our line officer group, has declined. That bucks every trend that I've seen nationally. So that's fortunate. And to Marcia's point, if anyone, either in this room or anyone you know, might have an inkling that they might be interested in volunteering, that would be fantastic. Sooner or later, in communities where the volunteer fire company is not able to sustain its capacity for response, those communities will have to go to paid fire, because fire is mandated in New York State. that is a budget that I don't want to be around when or if the village has to tackle. So the longer we can maintain and sustain an active, capable, and you can see by the number of interior firefighters that we have, an active and capable fire department, the longer we'll be able to push off that potential or possible future. Which brings us to Ben and my favorite soapbox of all time, EMS.
Also, perhaps the least favorite, the most urgent. Oh, am I gonna really?
There you go.
Oh, jeez. All right, this is, I feel like Keith doing stand-up. All right, so I will say I'm gonna try and keep this as brief as possible, but feel free to ask questions. We also have Joel Fay, as Jordan mentioned, right here. So if you have any really nitty-gritty granular questions, that's where you go. Oh, and Kevin's here too. We got the whole team. So last year I spent, I think, the bulk of my time, if I remember correctly, talking about some specific projects that we had going on. At that point, Joel was rolling out our RSI program. We were working on a new fly car. There was a lot of very exciting changes in the air. This year is no different, actually. We have a number of operational improvements that Joel has been working on and rolling out. But I'm going to do my best to focus on the sort of higher level trend that Jordan, I think, I don't know, refers to as our soapbox. But I think as a community, especially as members of a broader regional community, I think this is really the information that I would like people to take away and take with you when you go home. So I'm going to try and keep it a little bit higher level, but feel free when we get to the Q&A portion to ask questions. Oh, thank you. So this is the way I start my report every month when I give an EMS report. This is basically the breakdown by municipality. So each of these are municipal neighbors and partners that we contract with for EMS service. These are geographic areas and jurisdictions that we cover. So that's the number of calls in 2024 per municipality. And you can see calls by year as well is also called out. You'll see basically about a 10% increase. It fluctuates a little bit, 9.5, 10.5, but it's pretty nearly 10% every year. Our call rates have gone up. That has accelerated slightly in these last 3 years. If you go further back, that increase year over year is generally in the 5% range, but it is a continuing trend. The only year that I believe we've seen a decrease is the initial year of COVID, right? When calls, and I think people generally were scared to call 911. But aside from that 1 year, it's a pretty continuous increase. So the way that we get that done, right? The way that these guys get that done is 24-hour staff coverage that involves a paramedic and an EMT, sometimes 2 paramedics. Excuse me. That also, as Marcia mentioned, involves support from fire, from police departments, from neighboring EMS companies. So there is a huge complex system that supports our EMS department, and then our EMS department in turn supports. So 3 things I want to just call out specifically here. So of those 1,153 calls, 40% of those are ALS calls, which is a higher level of care. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's a stroke or a heart attack, but it means the probability increases. Of the 60% that are BLS calls, that doesn't necessarily mean, that they're non-life threatening, but it does reduce the probability. So I just want to call that out specifically. Our department we do a lot of calls that are, miscellaneous falls, right? And if you look around at statewide or regional data, you'll see that a lot. But the bulk of our calls, I would say a plurality, are urgent, potentially life-threatening calls where our EMS and the professionalism that they provide on each call is necessary. Also, I already mentioned that our increasing calls year over year is generally about 10%, and that's a pretty reliable trend. So we expect that to continue, although we hope it doesn't, but we expect it to continue over the next few years. And the last piece I want to call out is that bottom number. So the mutual aid number you see is about 13.4%. And what's notable about that is not only that that's 154 calls that our crews are going on outside of our district, so outside of our contracting partners, but that's more calls than 2 of our contracting partners combined, right? So that's a heavy load to bear. for our staff and for our crews. Jess, could you go to the next one? Or Ben? Thanks, Ben. So this is Roden's favorite slide, is what this is. Well, and least favorite. I mean, it really is both. I think it's favorite because it illustrates well the point that I was making earlier in terms of mutual aid in our response coverage area. And it is definitely our least favorite because I think it puts such a fine, direct point on the stress and the need and really the immense amount of work that our crews are doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's worth noting, kind of as a footnote, that when I say our crews, they are doing the work itself, right? They are out responding to the calls, but all of us as taxpayers are supporting that work, right? So this is 3 years of calls. The purple is 2024. You can get an idea of the spread. So this is Ulysses, Covert, Mecklenburg, and Hector. Those are the districts. So the black line is our district. And then everything outside of that line is mutual aid calls. Particularly, you can see these calls are almost all purple, right? So this is more of a recent trend. Our 2024 calls, we went to the city of Ithaca 56 times, which is, it's a lot. One thing that I want to point out specifically there, I don't mean to throw Bangs Ambulance under the bus. Bangs is in many ways the cornerstone and the bedrock of our regional system in ambulance, right? Their capacity is immense. For the decade or so that I've been doing this, historically, they have come to us far more than we've come to them. And it's only recently that trend has started to invert, and we now spend a lot of time in the city. But a lot of this is purely a function of the structural, systemic way that emergency medical care happens, and frankly, medical care in general. Right? This is a system where mutual aid is required. If we have an ambulance out, we need someone to cover us, right? To make sure that we're all safe and protected and can get a ride. Likewise, if everyone else is out, we cover them. And that's how the system works, and it works quite well. I do want to emphasize, though, that there is an embedded political issue here, right? So I mentioned there's about 13% mutual aid. That represents about $170,000 worth of calls, right? So the way that we annually do our contracts with the municipal partners that we contract with, it's a 3-year rolling average of calls. So each call, functionally, we can assign it. It's a little bit arbitrary and abstract, but functionally, we can assign each call a cost to the taxpayer. And that call for our mutual aid calls is about 170 grand that we do not recoup in any way, right? So all of us, all of our contracting partners, we're all subsidizing those calls into outside districts. Now, I want to emphasize again that those outside districts are also covering us under mutual aid. So it's not that there's no return, just that return is increasingly imbalanced or out of balance. So we go to the next. So you can see what's concerning, and I think the reason that Roden and I have spent so much time talking about this over the last 2 years is not that mutual aid exists, right? Mutual aid is a good, healthy part of our system. It's what allows us all. It's the reason that we can staff one crew, right? We know we have a backup. So if we're out on a call, we're covered. What's concerning is really the trend in mutual aid, right? So you can see 22, 67, 24, 154. Right, we're at more. I mean, it's a massive increase and a massive shift in how our crews spend our time. If you noticed on Marcia's slide, the fire department is at about 6% mutual aid. That used to be very standard for us. We're now more than double that as a percentage of our overall calls. So it's an important trend, I think, to understand as a community. It's an important reality to know that we are subsidizing those calls. I think. And I think the board is in agreement, although I don't want to speak for anyone else directly, but I will say that I feel strongly that is a good and necessary thing, right? We are protecting lives wherever we are going, but it is a reality that I think we should all be aware of. And I want to finish by pointing out something that I think is really, really spectacular. I said I wouldn't get in the weeds on specific projects, but generally, I wanted to highlight this lower graph. And you'll see I guess the numbers aren't specifically on there. I apologize for that. I meant to put them there, but you can see that what's what's helping us stay afloat, because in the EMS world, it's a rule of thumb that essentially when a given ambulance hits 1,000 calls a year, that's usually when you start looking at a second ambulance, right? Staffing a second crew, full or part-time. Our crews have blown straight through 1,000 calls a year, right? We're now, I mean, we're almost 200 calls above that sort of rule of thumb benchmark. And the way that we're doing it is substantial improvements within our department in terms of efficiency and operations, and a lot of help with second calls, right? So last year I mentioned the fly car. Joel has been working very, very hard to enable our crews and our staff that are maybe not on the clock right now, but willing to go in the same way as our fire company does, to cover second calls, to make sure that we're staffed, that, staff that are close by but not on call have a radio. All of those improvements have allowed a huge uptick in our ability to take second calls, which I will say, maybe I assume this, but I shouldn't. But a second call is essentially if our primary ambulance and our primary staff are out, and some of our staff will be working as on-call and will come in and staff that second ambulance. Or if Joel is working in an administrative capacity in the office that day, he can form sort of the backbone of the second call. And then sometimes, and I don't have these numbers, but we're also taking third calls. Marcia mentioned the fire in Ovid. So during that period, our ambulance was on site for a long period, and we took second and third calls simultaneous to that. So I think I will end there. But I think my hope is that the piece you will take away is both the disturbing and kind of concerning trend towards increased mutual aid, also higher calls per municipality in terms of our core contracting partners. But also, I think the immense capacity and resilience and agility of our crew and our team to respond to those things, right? To make these improvements so that we can not have to staff a second ambulance today. Maybe we can put that off. I think it certainly appears that we are trending in that direction, but for the moment, we don't have to double our budget because these folks are really doing amazing work. Yes. So that's a very good question. We have 2 ambulances and a fly car, right? So fly car.
Fly car.
The fly car basically is sort of our do everything, right? It's equipped nearly as an AMS ambulance, so it can respond and do, provide medical care with a single responder. It cannot transport patients. Excuse me, but it is functionally an ambulance without the transport capacity. And that flexibility, for a number of months this year, we didn't have a second ambulance because ours was in the shop for a disturbing amount of time and cost a disturbing amount of money. And in the end, it was so far gone that we ended up buying a used ambulance, which is something that this department has never done, and is a very good example, I think, of being sort of agile and responsive to the conditions that Joel has found himself in. But functionally, we have 2 full ambulances with a transport function, and then a fly car, which again allows us to provide medical care to render any need that's necessary outside of transport. Generally, no, it's EMS staff that happen to be community minded enough and live close enough or work close enough that they're able to respond. Now, I do want to say that frequently our fire company also responds to those calls. So it's not that they're going, or not that they're not going, but in general, we're talking about our paid staff providing on-call work. But I'll end it there.
I don't get out enough. I would like to be introduced to your fire chief and whoever else you got working with.
Sure. Joel Fay, please stand up. Thank you for that. This is Joel Fay, our EMS administrator and EMS chief. Matt, I believe, is working diligently in his office. I do not know. Did he walk in?
I think he departed.
Did he
Okay.
go?
This is the problem with being a volunteer, is you're always busy.
It wouldn't be a soapbox if I didn't climb up on it. Ben mentioned how there's an inherently political nature in this, and I try so hard to steer clear of anything political, particularly in our State of the Village meeting. But this is one where it's impossible to avoid. So first of all, I want to echo what's already been said. You know, one of my and Ben's asks or mandates of Joel when he became head of the department was it's an inevitability that we will eventually be a 2-ambulance 24/7 agency. To give you a sense of scale, our total village budget, not including water and sewer, our total village budget is about 3.8 million. Roughly 45% of that is EMS. So we're $1.4 million, $1.5 million within the EMS department, and of course we contract out so that that's not all being paid by village taxpayers. As you saw from the call breakdown, about 30% of that is paid for by village taxpayers. But of that 1.4 million, about 900,000 of it is payroll related, right? So that's salaries, wages, fringes, et cetera. So to go from 1 full-time ambulance to 2 means we're adding almost $1 million to payroll. So one of our asks of Joel was, I don't want to wake up one morning and get the phone call and say, guess what? We're a 2-ambulance 24/7 agency today. I want you to phase this in over time. I have no idea how to do that, but I know Joel does, right? So what he's been able to do very effectively over the last few years is figure out a way to kind of hybrid our way into a full-time 2-ambulance system. And it's worked very well. And if we can, for lack of a better phrase, kick that can down the road by maintaining this hybrid approach, that will be extremely helpful to the department and extremely helpful to all of us as taxpayers. The wild card is the mutual aid calls. And I hate the term mutual aid because there's very little mutual about it. Yes, Bangs used to respond into the village of Trumansburg a lot, but it's not one for one. If there's 153 mutual aid calls, Joe will probably know off the top of his head how often we are receiving mutual aid. I'm going to guess it's once a week or less, far less. So 153 mutual aid calls provided, less than 50 provided to us. There's an inherent imbalance there, and this unfortunately is where it gets political. There are going to be a lot of brand new county legislators this year. I believe there may be as many as 9 brand new county legislators in Tompkins County. Tompkins County Emergency Response has begun to do an exceptional job under their director, Mike Steitley, of looking at this problem. How do we fix this? Nearly 15% of our EMS agency calls are provided outside of district. Dryden Ambulance on the other side of the lake, which runs 3 full-time ambulances and has a budget nearly triple ours, has 40% of their calls going outside their district. Their residents are starting to say, that's not acceptable. We don't want you to go. Well, and Joel will be the first to attest to this, I believe, as a first responder and a medical provider, you don't want to be the person that doesn't respond to the call where someone ends up dying. So it's a huge catch-22 for the agencies. Tompkins County has been, unfortunately, very, very slow to want to do anything about this. And finally, within the last couple of years, I feel they've really stepped up to the plate with efforts to shore up the system, shore up the emergency response system. The county has stood up its own rapid response program. They call it, staffed by EMTs, not paramedics, who can begin to fill in the gaps in some of these calls. My worry is that with 9 brand new legislators coming on who probably, if I had to guess, don't know very much about EMS and first response, that program may not receive the support that it should. So not to deputize all of you to do what I do, but if you ever have conversations with someone who's interested in running for office at the county level, this is an existential type issue, right? This is not a program that we all believe in, that nevertheless we can live without. We can literally not live without emergency response if you happen to be the one that calls 911 for the help. I continue my work in working with Assemblymember Kellis, Senator Michelle Hinchy out of, I forget what district she's in, Albany area, has been very helpful. They understand how important this issue is. Our state legislators as a whole are slow to embrace the need for them to step in. They think this is an entirely local problem. They think it can be entirely solved at the county or local level. That's not correct. The state does need to step up and do more, particularly with funding. So again, if any of you love to have conversations with our state legislators, that would be one that I would encourage you to have. And in the meantime, Washington's interesting. Once upon a time, ambulance was something that had some federal mandate to it, and that was done away with decades ago. And so I think if it ever comes up, I don't really want to wander into these weeds. If it ever came up at a Health and Human Services level, which controls Medicare and Medicaid, then yeah, there might be a conversation to be had there about how do agencies receive better reimbursement. But the real, and again, I don't want everyone's eyes to glaze over with numbers. For about $500 million only, for about $500 million, Albany could essentially solve the EMS crisis in New York. And you think that's a large number? It's 0.5% of the state's annual budget. But Albany tends to not want to spend money on new things. They want to spend more money on existing things. So that's something we'll continue to work on. In the meantime, again, thanks to Joel and everyone involved in maintaining what is, when it works well, an extremely efficient system, and when it's under stress, is an extremely stressed system. And we will continue to get those ambulances out the door from the village's perspective. We'll continue to get the ambulances out the door and continue to make sure they're staffed with the best professionals that we possibly can staff them with. You want us to get a helicopter, Ruth? So that's a decision, correct me if I'm wrong, Joel, that's a decision that's made on scene based on the type or severity of the call and how long it would take to transport that person. Another this is the same soapbox. Another interesting piece is our friends at Hugo Medical Center will not accept certain types of patients because CMC is not considered a trauma unit. So certain types of incidents, certain types of calls must be sent to either Sayre, Syracuse, or Rochester. And then depending on the severity of those calls, it may be necessary to fly them there in order to save that individual's life. That could be, maybe already is a conversation that may need to be had locally about that piece. Yeah. We have a hand raised online. Yeah. You have to ask her to unmute.
Yeah, hi. I'm just wondering if you guys can repeat the questions that are being asked in the audience because we can't hear those questions online. If you could do that, that'd be helpful. And my other question, Roden, you answered, so thank you.
Yeah, that last question, Kate, was, should we get a helicopter? Just kidding. Yeah, Dave. So when the question was, how do we handle ambulances when they need service? When they need service, they go to the shop, whichever one they might need to go to, usually the one right here on 96. Some have, is Gorman. Sometimes it will need to be transported to a specialized shop for fire and EMS vehicles, but usually it's local. Well, we have 2 ambulances right now. We had to, as Ben mentioned, purchase a third. We've since gotten rid of the problematic one. So now we're back. I guess the problematic one is still hanging around, but we will be getting rid of it. And then we'll have 2 back in service. We have a new ambulance on order, which won't be here until I think later this fall or early next spring. At that point, I'm probably going to try to keep all 3 just so we can have some type of a rotation, probably run the second one more often if needed kind of thing. And then we have the fly car. The fly car is basically it's a Chevy Tahoe. It's an SUV with all the equipment necessary to for a paramedic to work. But as Ben mentioned, you can't transport someone in it. The patient or their insurance. I'm sorry, that last question was who bears the cost of getting the airlift to a hospital?
Give people microphones.
I was just wondering about our police call numbers. Like I know we kind of saw 2024, but I wondered if there was any sense of, compared to like over the last 5 years or something. And that's totally okay if you don't have that data, but I was just curious about our calls sort of historically.
Yeah, so for calls, I don't have any numbers for the past 5 years, but I will have, as I continue to work, have better records for history. But compared to last year, so in 2023, we had 1,693 calls, and in 2024, we had 2,302 calls. So it is quite of an increase in total. I spent some time looking at the trend, and the trend was very similar to what it is now. It's not like, it's very comparable.
And are there discussions about, I don't know, I'm sure they're about preventative or different measures if our calls are going way up? Like, are there talks about certain areas or certain strategies to address concerns?
I'll take half a step back. So historically, we've averaged between 150 and 200 calls a month. So the swing from 1,600 to 2,300 is not atypical. There really isn't, at least not that I've been able to identify, really isn't a rhyme or reason to that. Just some years are busier than others. But as Johanna mentioned, 90% of those are non-criminal in nature. So that's all the traffic, that's all the property checks, that's all the welfare checks, the well checks on someone who hasn't been heard from in a while, that kind of thing. So we don't, fortunately, find some wood to knock on. We don't have an issue in the community with respect to an increase in calls of a criminal nature. It really is, and it's fortunate to have a police department in a community where the police chief and the police officers tend to be members of the community. That police department really becomes much more of a community service than kind of the classic law enforcement role that police has to play from time to time. It has the capacity to serve that function for sure, and it's needed from time to time. But mostly it's the community aspect of it that makes it so worthwhile. And that's why you tend to see the call volume, although it can swing somewhat widely, you tend to see it stay relatively stable over long periods of time.
I should say that most of the increase in December were actually property checks versus last December. It almost doubled. So I should say that was the large swing in numbers.
Rob, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just curious, the 1.4 million, 45% of the budget that goes to EMS, what percentage or dollar amount do we get back from our contracts on that?
Roughly 70%. So our partners are paying we're splitting up the total cost by this formula that Ben mentioned, which is really call volume heavy. Of the 30% that village taxpayers are on the hook for, so I'm making up these numbers a little bit off the top of my head, but of the roughly $300 and some thousand that village taxpayers are responsible for, we do recoup about 140, 150,000 of that through billing, right? We are a billing agency, so the patient who gets the ambulance ride receives a bill. But a part of the great debate is that no matter how many calls you have and how much you bill, you never actually pay for the cost of all the calls. But it's certainly that $1.5 million is not borne by the village taxpayer.
No, well, in that light, if you're getting 70% back, then, and 30% is coming from the village, that 13.4% of mutual aid, some of that is actually being covered. It's not just,
Some of it is being covered,
Yeah.
yes.
I saw that NICEAG put up a three-phase pole in the village parking lot. You know where I'm going, Ben Carver. Can I be optimistic? There'll be a DC fast charger for electric vehicles in my lifetime?
Yes.
No.
The short answer is yes. So in the Village Hall parking lot, basically right next to that pole you mentioned, there will be a DCFC, a fast charger planned, as well as 2 level 2 chargers. Similarly, at the farmer's market, sort of at the edge of the parking lot, the furthest away from Salo Drive there will be another set of chargers. Those will be, I actually just heard, I thought we were going to be the first fast chargers, largely thanks to you, Rick, and bringing this project before us. But I thought we were going to be the first project in the Finger Lakes. I just heard that Watkins did one as well. So we're joining a club now, which is still exciting. Come on. But yes, I hope to have that completed, by the end of the summer or early fall is the goal, assuming everything goes right. Thank you.
That's a great segue into a couple of things I wanted to highlight for 2025. Soapboxes are easier to stand on than sit on. We'll have question was about Flock.
So FLOG is a system that some cities in New York State have, and small towns. So they work to identify vehicles that other police may be looking for. And it's really about looking to see if vehicles have come through our areas. If other police have requested that information. Yeah, they're cameras. No, no. No birds.
We'll have a lot of time. I hope to have a lot of time for more Q&A in a minute. I wanted to just touch on a couple of the kind of the big ticket items, or I shouldn't say big ticket necessarily, although some of them are. The large ongoing projects that I have on my front burner in my mind, and other members of the board are working diligently on, that we will continue to pursue in 2025. The first you've heard, of course, about, and a brief update on where we stand. We received what I believe is the village's first ever direct congressional appropriation, PORC, if we want to call it that, from Congress a year and a half ago for a new fire and EMS facility. So we were allocated $3.5 million, which sounds like a lot. Unfortunately, it's not as much as it used to be. For the new facility, we are now in the process of kind of fine-tuning the design of the facility. I gave our engineers a mandate to get it. Well, I gave our fire and EMS department a mandate to get it to a certain size, and then gave our engineers a mandate to get it to a certain price. The price I gave them was about $6 million. It's probably going to be more than that. But if we can keep it in that range, then that leaves us $2.5-ish million short. My hope is that we'll be able to pick up a little bit more grant money from other sources. I've begun talking with the senior leadership in the fire company about doing an actual capital campaign, which I'm actually going to, looking at faces in this room, lean on some of you for help with. Capital campaign is not fundraising from the community through chicken barbecues to raise money. Capital campaign is letters to large institutions, Park Foundation, might have to unfortunately cross Cornell off the list at this point, but Park Foundation, CMC Foundation, Tompkins Trust Company, and then a handful of, shall we say, higher profile, wealthy individuals who live on the lake in our fire district, and say, listen, we need $1 million. I'm not going to name names at the moment, you, sir, cut a check for $52 million to Cornell a few years ago. How about 250,000? You know, that kind of thing. That I think is something that has certainly never been done locally, not for the village anyway, but has the potential to raise something. If it's $500,000, if it's $1 million, we'll take as much as we can get as far as that goes. I would like to break ground on this facility next spring. We have to work out some of the details in terms of the site location and the arrangement with the current owner of that property. But that's still in the works. It's something that, although we love this room because we like to meet in it, this building is now 40 years old and does not meet the current standards for, certainly not for EMS and their needs, and neither does it meet the standards, the modern standards for a modern fire department. So I'm glad we're moving forward on that piece. And like everything else, most everything else in life, all it takes is time and money. So we're working on the money, and we kind of now have a little bit of a timeline for that project. Yes, sir.
How is it used? How is it put on the market?
Question is who owns the current Village Fire Hall, and what happens when the new Village EMS fire facility is online? The answer is the Village of Trumansburg owns this property. It will remain to be seen what it's used for. The most obvious, and I don't want anyone in the back corner of the room to get too excited just yet, but the most obvious use for it would be DPW. So the village would have to find out the most efficient way to repurpose this room. One of the things we've been working on in the diagramming and the planning of the new building is the original version we started out with a few years ago was going to be about 23,000 square feet, lots of bells and whistles, huge meeting room, that kind of thing. That price tag came in around $9 million. So to shrink that back, we're looking at things like maybe we don't have a large meeting room. Maybe we continue to use this room for these kinds of meetings. Maybe the fire and EMS facility is not publicly accessible. It's just for our emergency responders and staff. So we have to, if we're going to be able to build it, we have to be able to afford it. In order to afford it, we have to make some of those compromises. Yeah, Dave. Question is about Village of Cayuga Heights has what's called a bunking program where they can house new volunteers and volunteer recruits, and whether we have something like that in mind. It's something we've talked about. The Village of Cayuga Heights has the advantage of being 15 feet from Cornell. So a bunking program, and I know a lot of people who went through that program and ended up going on to careers as professional firefighters. That's a great program if you can find the people. I think our advantage here in Trumansburg is probably not that we will get Cornell students to come and bunk here, although it's something to consider. I think our advantage here is, frankly, we have a wonderful school district. And as we get families that want to live here or send their kids to our school, maybe, and as I've seen in the last 10 or 15 years, maybe a mom or a dad decides they want to volunteer. I think that's probably a more likely approach to manage our volunteerism than recruiting bunkers, but anything's possible, and all of the above is fair game when it comes to maintaining some level of volunteerism in the fire company. Next item, and we can feel free again to ask questions about any or all of these things at the end. Our second kind of big hot button issue, which probably won't see a lot of movement this year, but we did receive a $2.6 million grant to put sidewalk on unfortunately, the other side of Main Street from the farmer's market to Seneca Road, and from that intersection to Compass Mobile Home Park, and across that intersection from the corner of Main and Seneca on what would be the northeast side to the doctor's office, past the Legion to the doctor's office, and to the First Baptist Church. That is a project that is under the coordination of New York State DOT. So they have us scheduled to do the construction in 2026 and 2027. I don't believe there'll be any delay in that. They tend to be fairly punctual about those things. So we had an organizational meeting on this about a month and a half ago. We're still on track. The money is allocated. We're in the process. This year, basically what will happen is all behind the scenes. It'll be engineering, it'll be surveys, it'll be making sure we have the rights of way that we need to have to, to run the sidewalk. DOT will be repaving 96 through the village in 2028. So there's some coordination of what that might look like, even though the projects will not be happening at the same time. But that's something that once completed will connect the entirety of the village outside the village, from the SureSave to the doctor's office and Compass with sidewalk all the way through the village, which was something that was targeted way back in 2007 when the county did a walkability study and determined that Trumansburg was a particularly walkable community, and wouldn't it be great if we had sidewalk from end to end. They didn't offer any money for it. They just said it would be a great idea. So here we are. The third big one, which we haven't talked about it at a village meeting in a couple of years, and I want to acknowledge Fred Bond, who is Regional Director of Finger Lakes State Parks, has graciously joined us this morning, trying to stay somewhat incognito, so he's not bombarded with questions. Some of you will recall we had a meeting in this room, searching the memory banks, February of 2022. We announced that the towns of Ulysses and Covert and the village had entered into a partnership to work with state parks to be the management arm of what would be a future state park if state parks were able to purchase the property at Camp Barton. It only took 3 years for that to come to conclusion, but the property is now in the possession of New York State. There's a lot of kind of details yet to come in terms of publicity and public announcements. The name has not been determined yet, so we're waiting on some of those things, hoping to have that this spring. But the village, the part that is kind of on our shoulders is that the village and the town of Ulysses and the town of Covert have formed in early 2023, formed essentially a not-for-profit corporation. It's called a local development corporation. It's a not-for-profit entity whose board is comprised of members from each of the municipalities. And this LDC, as we call it, is going to be the property manager, if you will, of this state park. And this year in particular, a lot of the work will be working in conjunction with the local Parks Regional Office to determine, what are we going to do and when. So there'll be more to come. There'll be a lot of public announcements as soon as we are given more details from Albany on things like the name and so forth. And I'll be putting out all of that information when I have it to share. Long term, of course, as I discussed in that meeting in 2022, the goal is to have a locally managed state park on the shores of Cayuga Lake, which of course is over 90% privately owned, publicly accessible. Again, can't lose sight of the fact that it's a state park, but we'll have certainly a lot of say in how it's managed, say in what the programming looks like, and that part is what we will be spending the next several years. I think I would say 3 to 5 years developing that plan on how to make this another regional attraction that also has the benefit of being accessible to all of us for our local programming. The Boy Scouts sold the property to New York State. So it's a state park, and we do have a good working relationship with scouts who would like to use the property for some of their events every year. And some of that is dependent on certain things coming online on the property, making it usable and accessible again. So that will also develop over time. Fred, yeah.
Placement of the Frontenac Road was a great project that they received a grant for, and that will also have a pedestrian crossing that will complement the vehicle crossing, making it much safer. Good morning. Again, my name is Fred Bond. I'm your regional director for the Finger Lake State Park System. The town of Covert just began construction a couple of weeks ago on a replacement bridge on North Frontenac Road that will greatly improve access and safety. The road bridge will be complemented by a pedestrian crossing as well on that structure.
And again, happy to answer more questions as they come to mind at the end. Water infrastructure, really Ben covered most of this. We are fortunate to have, some places in the Finger Lakes, unfortunately, it's water everywhere and not a drop to drink. We are not one of those communities. We have a fantastic water infrastructure system in terms of the provision of the water. I've mentioned in the past, although it's not something that's on anyone's radar at the moment, we have excess capacity, so there's the ability to provide more water should we need it to our neighbors outside our boundaries. But that's a very expensive proposition for them, so that's why you don't see a lot of movement on that. And so we continue to really, I think if you're ever wondering what does the village board do, or what's their perspective, or what's their agenda. The agenda, my agenda, and I believe the agenda of everyone on this board, is to make sure that we maintain as efficient a working environment as we can for our services that we offer. That includes everything from employees to how departments operate to the infrastructure underneath the ground. And everything we do is kind of geared towards how do we maintain that, and yes, how do we pay for it? Water being one of the more expensive ones I have to pay for. So that's always an ongoing, sometimes moving target, but always an ongoing focus. And then the last thing that I'll mention is kind of goes hand in hand with the efforts down at, we got to get that name, Fred, the former Camp Barton. And this is I don't want to belabor this or put too fine a point on it. The relationship between the village of Trumansburg and the town of Ulysses government has, in my opinion, never, ever been better. And 3 years ago now, already, when we celebrated our sesquicentennial, hopefully some of you got to attend. We did that cute play at the Historical Society. The Encore players drafted some of us to play some roles. And I got a kick out of the fact that they had me play the role of the then Ulysses town supervisor at the meeting in which the village of Trumansburg incorporated its government in 1872. He was not a happy man. He was very, very unhappy that the village had decided to form its own entity and its own government. And that sentiment has at times over the last 153 years, and certainly in my time on the board, has reared its head from time to time. And certainly Ben will remember, and I recall some very contentious at times interactions with our colleagues on the Ulysses Town Board over the years over any variety of issues. And really 7 or 8 years ago, it started to take a real turn towards a real desire to collaborate. Yes, we will disagree on certain things. Yes, we will sometimes argue about whether we need to get that new fire truck this year or can we push it off a couple of years, those kinds of things. But on the whole, the level of collaboration and cooperation between the village board and the town board, I think, not 153 years old, but I think is at an all-time high. And that is evidenced by things like the ability to work together on really a first of its kind in the state collaboration to manage the name that Fred is going to get me as soon as possible. State Park. Another collaboration that is not yet a collaboration, but I expect it will be this recently announced extremely generous offer from a Ulysses Town resident to donate land to the town for the purposes of being a recreation location, a recreation park. They're calling it a town park. Of course, designs are TBD. What exactly it would look like will be TBD. But as we saw with the discussions, to put it pleasantly, about the purchase of land a year and a half ago for recreation fields, there are differences of opinion about how necessary it is. I fall firmly on the side that we have youth in this community who are traveling hours to find places to play soccer, basketball, although this property won't help with the basketball, baseball. And although the school does the best that it can, its space is limited. And it wasn't something that was really on my mind until a few years ago when I was at the high school. It was a gorgeous September afternoon. And it was a Tuesday afternoon, and there were 3 soccer practices, a soccer game, 2 football practices, and a 7-school cross-country meet, all occurring at the same time. And I was actually really worried someone was going to get hurt. I mean, when you see a high school cross-country runner weaving their way through a soccer practice, it's a recipe for something bad to happen. And I realize that's not every day of the week. I realize there's an argument that says, well, maybe the school can schedule better, but the reality is more rec space will be used. And the fact that the town has received this offer to have land donated to it for this purpose is something that I'm personally quite excited about. And my conversations with Supervisor Olson, I think the village will be happy to assist in whatever logistical way we might be able to make this effort become a reality. Yes, Cynthia.
Thank you. I just want to say, I think that the village board is doing a fantastic job. So I echo what you said earlier. And I appreciate everybody's work. A lot of people don't realize that it's really, you just get a stipend. This is not a salary. And the other thing is that thank you for the good work with the Ulysses Town. That really matters. And for all of these things greatly laid out today. Fully agree with you about each one of us addressing the new people running for a county legislator, because we do need to ask them how they will deal with EMS and support that and continue to support that, and probably even more so. But to come to this town park, fully agree with it. I hope we all write letters of support. I have daughters, they're full grown. And let me tell you who gets cut first, the girls' teams. It really does happen. And then they travel more so. So the fields get muddy. That's what happens. It's overuse. And then they cannot be used for practice. So that's one of the problems. So I hope everybody does support this. If we want to see young families here, this is one way to support families. So whether your children are still in the district or not, they're grown up, they're someplace else, or you don't even have children. These are people that are going to be our future. We want to support children because they are our future. They're going to be the nurses in the future and the EMS workers. So we support them today. They support us tomorrow in our old age.
Yeah, so with that, I would take any questions anyone has on anything you've seen today, anything I just talked about, or anything none of us talked about, as long as it's village related. Yeah, Ruth.
Getting on to if there's people complaining about the salt mine closure, is there anything that we should be thinking about? I often think of bomb dropping right there, and there goes your water supply, there goes everything.
As a member of the Hugo Lake Watershed Intermunicipal Organization, QIO for short. So every lake in the Finger Lake, I think everyone, I'd have to go back and double check, but most, if not all of the lakes in the Finger Lakes, the municipalities have an actual watershed authority, with the exception of Cayuga Lake. So a few years ago, this effort began, and it's really, the Watershed Authority is the one that kind of takes the lead on all or most of the environmental efforts. And then the membership, if there's action to be taken, that comes back to the membership to advocate for it. So it's ongoing. Not a lot of it makes headlines, but it's an ongoing effort to make sure we protect the entire Finger Lakes watershed, but particularly Cayuga Lake, since that's where we are.
I'll
Janice,
just say something
go
real
ahead.
briefly to that too. I know the town is slightly more involved as the village property is backed off from the lake. We obviously have concerns around water specifically, but we don't have lakefront property in the village. So I know the town has more to do with that. So if you're also interested in that particular topic, definitely tune into the town. There's been some conversations there recently about what the town's involvement and how they might be how they might advocate for more oversight and a deeper look at what's going on over there. We do have our wells down there, yeah.
Yeah, Janice.
Your grant writer, I think we should recognize what a fantastic job they're doing, whoever that is.
Oh, well, yes. So if you saw the bill, you might not want to necessarily. we use MRB Group, who's our engineer. Little note on MRB, when they first became our village engineer, they had 67 employees and now they have 180. And I hope all of that didn't come from village dollars. But they've expanded from being just an engineering firm to doing a lot of municipal work, municipal planning, and they have some very good grant writers. The fire and the Main Street sidewalk and all of our water infrastructure money comes through grant writing. So yes, thank you to MRB for writing those grants. The fire and EMS money was straight lobbying. That was going directly working with well, I really started when we were in Congressman Reed's district, trying to get him to include us in some direct appropriation. He never actually did. And then when we were redistricted, Congressman Molinaro, who actually had been a volunteer firefighter in his hometown, he seemed to really like, he visited and he seemed to really like kind of how we were operating our department, and particularly on the EMS side, how we were making things work in this environment. So he included us in a House budget, and it survived reconciliation with the Senate budget, and so here we are. So.
Oh, okay. Does that help? Okay. With the DPW, as we had a big break at South Street and Wig Street, as we all know, on Halloween, how they worked very hard to get that fixed before the hordes of trick-or-treaters showed up and saved the day, basically. Thank you, Dusty, and the crew. But the thing I am concerned about is, how many main breaks we have now. And it doesn't appear to me that the pipes have been replaced in a timely manner throughout the village. Is there any grant that can be written for that to try to improve the main, the lines?
I'll let Ben speak to it more, but yes, so that is the water infrastructure line behind me. That is effectively what that is. We have a fantastic water system, but it's transmission lines that need replacement. There was an article, where was that article? There was an article about pipes in the southern part of the county being almost 100 years old. So we're actually well ahead of that. Ours are only about 65 years old. There isn't a best practice when it comes to replacing mains. And as I mentioned a few years ago in a meeting, it runs a little over, it's probably a lot more now, a few years ago, it was a little over $1 million a mile to replace water main. There's a little over 12 miles of water main underneath the village. So, we're looking at 12, well, then it would have been about 12 million. It's probably a lot more. So yes, it would have to be grants. If you take payroll into account and overtime and parts, you're looking at, $1,500 a water main break. So when you do the math on the repayment cycle, it's a couple of centuries worth of water main breaks. We don't have more than we've ever had. I mean, 9 is higher. Last year, I think it was 5. Some years ago, we had 16 or 17 one year. So it's very hit or miss on those numbers. And it's to Ben's comment earlier, it's actually not the condition of the pipe that causes the break. It's the condition of the ground around it more than anything else. So it's on our radar. It's something that from a strictly financial standpoint, it actually makes more sense to just fix them when they break. But there is grant money. There is grant money out there to replace sections that we think are the worst, which doesn't guarantee that they won't break. But that is something that we'll continue to explore.
Yeah, I think that mostly covers it, but I will say 2 other things. One of the reasons why, like I said, I'm excited about water valves is that it does reduce the impact of those breaks when they do happen. So that is a real key part of continuing to reduce the impact of those breaks because, as I mentioned and Roden reiterated, that it's really about the ground around it, and you can't tell where there's a stone sitting against a water main that might get pushed in from frost heaves. So it's very difficult to say in advance where those water breaks will be. There's a slightly different question about the systemic viability of the whole system, and we are slowly walking our way towards getting more of a what they call a hydraulic model, a water model of the whole system. And they can go through and check water flow at different hydrants and say, this pipe has full flow through it. This pipe is actually restricted quite a bit. Maybe that means that there's buildup there. We should inspect that. And so there's a way we can slowly build up our knowledge of the system so we know what to anticipate and be a little bit more proactive. But it may come back as the result that our pipes are fine for another 20, 30 years. As Roden said, there's pipes in the county that are 100 years old and still managing. So I know every time there's a water break or every time they're doing any of the valve replacement or looking at any of the pipes, they're keeping an eye on quality and checking. But we continue to talk about this, and there's no areas that we know right now that seem very at risk at a systemic level on like a whole large water main. So we're trying to stay ahead of that, but it's, it ends up being kind of whack-a-mole with the water breaks, but they're kind of unrelated problems, which is kind of counterintuitive.
Well, just to hit on that one on South Street, that was a freak accident caused by the paving crew. And to say caused by them isn't fair to them. They were rolling the blacktop. It put pressure on the valve. The valve in the ground there was dated, manufactured 1994. Dana recalled them putting it in somewhere around 2004. It still had paint on it from when they put it in the ground 20 years ago. The bolts had rotted around it, which is what caused the problem. The riser box that comes up through the street had pushed the rotten bolts through. We replaced the bolts and the main was in fine shape. The 2 breaks we've had in the last 2 weeks, the main has been in perfect condition, minus, like Ben is saying, one big rock underneath and 2 months worth of below 30 temperatures pushing frost up and down in the ground puts pressure on different sections that cause breaks. Not really. Occasionally, and honestly, in the last 5 or more years, the amount of breaks we've seen where the main itself has holes in it from bad sections is 1 or 2, as opposed to most of our breaks are circular. So they break right around the pipe, insinuating that there was something putting pressure on that spot that caused it to break there.
Yeah, David.
Just out of curiosity, you said there have been 11 valves replaced. How many valves are there?
Do you happen to know that, Dusty?
I don't have an exact count, but I believe there would be somewhere between 80 and 100.
Oh, 80 and 100 there. Yeah, and I think, they're not Some of them are newer, some of them older. One of the other things I didn't mention is we now have a fully digitized map of the entire water system and sewer system. And we can now use that to start tracking this and putting notes in and saying, this one was replaced now, this one was replaced then. Getting better at exercising them, just, turning them on and off at times helps keep them, extend the lifetime, so we can start tracking when we're exercising them and build some of an exercise program through that. So there's a lot of modernization that's going on in the background that we're not necessarily always talking about, to try and extend the life and make sure we're getting out and being more proactive. Because I think it's fair to say we've been more reactive in water and sewer for quite some time, and now we're kind of starting to turn around and be more proactive on addressing some of those needs.
Looking back at the history on our water main, I keep a record of water main breaks for the last almost 15 years. And with the replacement of these valves in the last year, you can see the time it takes for us to complete a water main break, having dropped from roughly 8 to 10 hours to approximately 5 to 6 hours on the last year's worth of breaks, or this winter's, after replacing those valves. The break we had yesterday right on Main Street required us to turn 3 valves, all within a pretty close area. When we only have to turn 2 or 3 as opposed to 7 or 8. The older valves can take 2 guys with a wrench on the valve. Each valve is roughly 6 turns per inch of pipe. So when you figure most pipes are 6 inches or 8 inches in diameter, that means the guys have to go around in a circle 30 plus times to close a bad valve, as opposed to a new valve where one guy can stand and just turn it by hand. So it makes a huge difference just in time of one person as opposed to 2. But the amount of times, it's not a quarter turn valve like you have in your house where you can just turn it by hand. Replacing those valves is a huge time savings in our work on the water mains.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. When I think about the quality of the mains versus the water breaks, right? I really do see them as 2 separate trains of thought. And on the water breaks, because they're random, we can't anticipate them. What we can do is get ahead of them with water valves replacement, and that reduces the time that reduces the people who are impacted when there is one, right? Those are the mitigation approaches we can take for those. And then trying to understand the system holistically and where there might be issues in specific stretches of main. That's kind of a totally separate track. And we're starting to walk down that path with MRB, with our engineering firm, and thinking about building the right models so we can kind of understand what that looks like.
Yes, sir.
So I'm George Cook. I'm on the board at the conservatory, and I first just want to thank everyone in the community and the village for their support for our project. And just give you a quick update that our first phase is fully funded and construction has started. And we are, right now in progress. So we've applied to NISCA for some additional funding so that we can complete the project. So just asking everyone to please, tell your legislators that this is important, and to get, them to continue to support the project. So thank you again for everyone for supporting it, and we are moving forward, and hopefully we'll be open back up again in the relatively near term future. We are still doing offsite programming. In fact, we have 2 things coming up tomorrow. On the 9th, Toivo is going to do their annual kind of time thing where they do a spring ahead and fall back kind of thing. And then we are doing a benefit concert with Kilrush, an Irish band up in Ovid for the Ovid fire there. So we're going to do that at the VFW up there, or I think it's the VFW. So it's all on our calendar. So we do have those 2 events coming up. And so we have this on the road series also that we continue to try to support the community with events. But the dance program, in terms of kids and the families, I mean, it's huge. That's our biggest program. And we are still open for the dance program. The dance program is still happening there. So because the construction has allowed that to happen. The school has also been extremely helpful in working with us to accommodate our needs during this phase where the building isn't fully in commission. So.
I think you have a robust website. It's tcfa.org, I think. You can, is it that? tcfa.live. Go there.
Other questions?
This may be this beyond your scope, but I wonder if there'd be a brief report or a progress report on the South Street project, whose name I forget. You know, the residential.
Sure.
What's it? Okay. Crescent Lane or whatever.
David, there are very few things that are beyond the scope of this board. So Crescent Way, the question was about Crescent Way, Village Grove. The nursery school on site is open and active. They moved in the first part of January. The apartment building, there were 39 available, if memory serves. There were 39 available apartments. They had 153 applicants for it. I believe most of those folks have moved in. The construction has begun, and many folks noticed the truck traffic. Construction has begun on the affordable for sale homes, and the market rate plots. So there was the approved plan that the planning board approved has the apartment complex, which is affordable rentals, and then there's affordable for sale homes, and then there's market rate homes, which will be constructed. As I said, the construction on the affordable for sale homes began this fall, and then the market rate homes, or what's going to happen is the land is going to be, or has actually, 2 plots were listed last week, are listed for sale. It's somebody who was on that list of 153 people and didn't make that. So the land on the market rate side is for sale, with the stipulation that there are design guidelines in place as to how those houses have to be built, and then a prospective buyer can choose who they want to do the building for them. So that's kind of
anticipated that this project will be completed pretty much in 2 years.
Well, I mean, the affordable rental pieces are effectively completed. The nursery school piece is completed. I'm guessing and this is just me guessing, I don't know this, I don't know the developer's timeline, but if the affordable for sale homes broke ground in the fall, I would expect that they'll be completed by the fall of 25, give or take. You know, it's renovation and construction. You can add a month, or 3 to either side of that. And then the market rate is just going to be a function of who buys the land and when.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Other questions?
I just think it's been a rough winter with all the ice and the snow and the fires, and I just want to say thank you to EMS and DPW. It's been working really hard.
Plowing. I see it always happens on a weekend, so. Overtime. It's worth it.
Might be happening again later today. I don't know. Well,
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I did want to add that we all took a tour of the Crescent Way development. The director was there, everyone was there that was involved, and it is beautiful. I've got to tell you, those apartment buildings, and coming from somebody that was a very young, divorced mom with 2 kids, they had to live in a crappy apartment. I got really kind of emotional going through them, wishing that something like that had been available to me when I was in that circumstance. I mean, obviously my circumstances have changed drastically, but I can go back to those very hard, difficult times. And it's just lovely. And it's great that we give those types of people that are hard, you know, it's just wonderful to have something that people can afford. Yes. Yeah, and the director at some point, I think, is coming like in May or whatever, if,
Yes, Kate De La Garza, who's the executive director at INHS, will be attending a village board meeting in May to kind of give us a more formal update to David's question about where things stand. Yeah, question in the back?
right.
But I'm there, I'm embracing the community, I'm here to learn a lot. And unfortunately, there's only about a third of us in there so far in the apartment. I just am getting a new neighbor today. I've not had anybody, been there a month and not had anybody on either side of me. So I'm excited that, yes, eventually I'll fully up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, welcome.
Welcome to the neighborhood.
These affordable units, how are they being kept affordable? In other words, market forces would govern, I would think.
Well, how long do you have?
Yeah, it's better for the.
So there's a carve out in New York State real estate property law, as I think you'll recall, which allows for certain very specific organizations that hold the land in what's called a housing trust, and that's INHS. So everything is held, the ground underneath everything affordable in the development is held in a housing trust. And that allows them to maintain certain things like price controls on affordability, certain abatements on certain property taxes and so forth. The market rate homes won't be subject to that. That's why they're for sale. Well, if there aren't any other questions, we'll be sticking around for a few minutes if anyone does have a question that you didn't want to ask publicly. But I want to thank everybody for coming. I think I can probably speak for everyone on the board. I think this particular meeting every year is something we look forward to. It's nice to just have kind of a more informal time to talk about village things without an agenda of items that we have to get through. So thank you for coming. Anytime you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything that you want to address, I know everyone on this board is available. Certainly you can reach out to me. I'm not hard to find. And we're always happy to help with anything that we possibly can. So thank you.
And a general reminder that the village board meets monthly, the second Monday of every month. In-person conversations are best.